Stop scrolling. If this video just appeared in front of you, you need to understand something immediately. This is not random. This is not just another spiritual video. And you did not accidentally find this. There are moments, rare, precise moments, when information from ancient systems of knowledge surfaces into your awareness at the exact point your mind is ready to decode it. And right now you are in one of those moments, because the name you just saw, Thoth, is not just mythology. It represents a system of intelligence, an ancient understanding of reality, consciousness, and time itself that most people will never access in their entire life. And yet you're here. Out of millions of videos, billions of signals, infinite distractions, you landed on this one. So either this is coincidence or something far deeper is happening. Because in both ancient teachings and modern quantum theory, there is one principle that remains consistent: awareness is not passive. Awareness is selective, which means you don't just see information, you resonate with it. And if you're seeing this right now, it means your mind has reached a frequency where this message can finally make sense. But here's the warning: moments like this don't repeat the same way. You either recognize the signal, or you move past it, and the window closes. So don't treat this lightly, because what you're about to understand is not just about manifestation. It's about mastering your timeline. Before we go deeper, take a second. If something in you feels like this message is meant for you, subscribe, like this video, and comment below. Comment this exactly: I was chosen. And tell me which part of the United States you're watching from. Because awareness spreads through connection, and you're not here alone. Now let's begin. When most people hear the name Thoth, they think of mythology, an ancient Egyptian figure, a symbol, a story. But what they don't realize is that figures like Thoth were never meant to be understood as individuals in the way we understand people today. They were representations of intelligence systems, frameworks of knowledge, encoded teachings designed to preserve advanced understanding about reality long before modern science had the language to describe it. And one of the core ideas connected to this system is the nature of reality itself. Because according to both ancient teachings and quantum physics, reality is not fixed. It is responsive. At the smallest measurable level, everything exists as probability, not certainty. Particles don't behave like solid objects until they are observed. This is known as the observer effect. And this single principle changes everything. Because if observation influences reality, then consciousness is not separate from the physical world. It is directly interacting with it. Now think about what that means for your life. Your thoughts, your focus, your awareness, they are not just internal experiences. They are signals. And those signals are constantly interacting with a field of infinite possibilities. This is what modern science refers to as the quantum field, and what ancient systems described as the underlying fabric of existence. Different language, same concept. Now here's where it becomes personal. If reality responds to observation, then the version of reality you experience is not random. It is influenced by the way you perceive and interpret the world. This doesn't mean you control everything instantly, but it does mean you are participating in the creation of your experience at a deeper level than you've been taught. And this is where most people disconnect, because they've been conditioned to believe that reality is something that happens to them. External, fixed, independent. But once you begin to understand these principles, you realize something important: you are not just inside reality. Reality is responding to you. Now let's go deeper. There is a concept often associated with ancient teachings called the scroll of knowledge, or the record of understanding. In modern terms, you can think of this as access to information, not through books or external sources, but through awareness itself. Moments where insights appear suddenly, ideas that seem to come from nowhere, connections that feel too precise to be coincidence. From a scientific perspective, this can be explained as pattern recognition and subconscious processing. But from a deeper perspective, it can also be seen as alignment. When your mind reaches a certain level of clarity, it begins to access higher quality information. Not because it was hidden, but because you weren't tuned to it before. This is what being chosen actually represents. Not that something external selected you randomly, but that your internal state reached a point where this information became accessible. You became compatible with it, and compatibility is everything. Because in both quantum theory and manifestation principles, like attracts like, not in a mystical sense, but in a resonance-based sense. Your dominant patterns, your thoughts, your emotional states, your beliefs, they create a baseline frequency. And that frequency determines what you notice, what you focus on, and what you interpret as meaningful. So when you say, "Why did I see this video?" the better question is, what about my current state made this visible to me? Because millions of people may scroll past this exact moment and feel nothing, but you didn't. And that difference matters. Now here's the educational part most people miss. Awareness alone is not enough. Understanding must be followed by application. Because knowledge without integration changes nothing. So if reality is responsive, and your awareness influences it, then the next logical step is learning how to stabilize your awareness in a way that produces consistent outcomes. This is where manifestation begins to move from theory to practice. But before we go into techniques, you need to understand one more foundational idea. Your perception filters your reality. Two people can experience the same situation and interpret it completely differently. One sees opportunity, the other sees limitation. One feels possibility, the other feels doubt. And over time, those interpretations compound. They create patterns, and those patterns become identity. I'm someone who succeeds. I'm someone who struggles. I'm someone who gets lucky. I'm someone who always misses chances. These are not just thoughts. They are self-reinforcing loops, and once they stabilize, they begin to shape your external results, not because reality is biased, but because your perception directs your behavior, and your behavior influences your outcomes. This is where ancient teachings and modern psychology intersect. Both recognize that internal patterns create external effects. The difference is ancient systems described it symbolically. Modern science describes it analytically. But they point to the same truth. Change your internal framework, and your external experience begins to shift. Now remember this, you don't need to believe everything instantly, but you do need to observe. Pay attention to your patterns. Notice how you react to situations. Notice what you expect before something happens. Because expectation is one of the strongest signals you send into the field. If you expect failure, you prepare for it. If you expect success, you align with it. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to create a difference over time. And that consistency is what transforms awareness into mastery. There's a common assumption that time moves in a straight line. Past, present, future, one direction, one path. But both advanced physics and deeper philosophical systems suggest something different. Time is not strictly linear. It is layered, interconnected, and influenced by perspective. This doesn't mean you can jump randomly between realities at will. But it does mean that your current state is constantly interacting with potential future outcomes. Think of your life not as a single path, but as a range of possible paths. Each decision you make, each belief you reinforce, each action you take, shifts you slightly toward one version of the future over another. This is what people refer to as timelines, not in a science fiction sense, but as a practical way to understand probability. At any given moment, there are multiple outcomes available, and your current state determines which ones become more likely. Now here's where it gets interesting. Your future is not completely separate from you. In fact, your future is constantly influencing your present, through intuition, through ideas, through subtle impulses that guide your attention. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly felt pulled toward something, without knowing exactly why? A video, a conversation, a decision, and later it turned out to be important. That's not random. That's alignment. From a psychological perspective, this can be explained as subconscious processing. Your brain is constantly analyzing information, predicting outcomes, and guiding your attention. But from a broader perspective, it can also be understood as feedback from potential futures, signals from outcomes that are becoming more probable based on your current direction. Now here's the key: the stronger your alignment, the clearer those signals become. If your mind is constantly distracted, if your emotions are unstable, if your focus is scattered, those signals get drowned out. But when you become more aware, more focused, more consistent, you begin to notice them. And once you notice them, you can act on them. This is where timeline mastery becomes practical. It's not about controlling everything. It's about increasing your awareness of direction, because direction determines outcome. Now let's bring this into something actionable. There are 3 core elements that influence your timeline: your thoughts, your emotional state, your identity. Most people try to change their future by changing their actions alone, but actions are influenced by deeper layers. If your thoughts are negative, your actions will reflect hesitation. If your emotional state is unstable, your decisions will lack consistency. If your identity is limiting, you will unconsciously avoid opportunities that don't match it. So real change starts deeper, at the level of identity. You don't just act differently, you begin to see yourself differently, and that shift changes everything. Because once your identity changes, your thoughts adjust automatically. Your emotional patterns begin to stabilize, and your actions become more aligned. This creates momentum, and momentum shifts probability. Now here's something important. You don't need to become a completely different person overnight. In fact, trying to force massive change often creates resistance. Instead, you make small, consistent adjustments. You notice one pattern. You improve one response. You make one better decision. And over time, those small changes compound. They shift your baseline. And once your baseline shifts, your entire trajectory begins to change. This is how timelines are mastered, not through sudden breakthroughs, but through consistent alignment. Now let's connect this back to the idea of being chosen. You were not chosen in the sense that something external selected you randomly. You were chosen in the sense that your current trajectory brought you to this point. Your patterns, your interests, your level of awareness, all of it contributed to this moment. And now you have a choice. You can ignore it, or you can use it, because awareness without action fades, but awareness with application transforms. And that transformation doesn't just affect one area of your life. It influences everything: your decisions, your relationships, your opportunities, your direction. So as you move forward from this moment, don't focus on trying to control the entire future. Focus on aligning your present, because the present is where all timelines begin. And the more aligned you are right now, the more your future begins to reflect it. Now we move into the part that most people never reach, not because it's hidden, but because it requires a level of honesty and awareness that few are willing to sustain. Up until now, you've understood that your awareness is not passive, that your perception influences your reality, and that your current state determines the direction of your timeline. But understanding alone does not shift anything unless it becomes something you live from consistently. This is where what can be called signal awareness begins. It is the ability to recognize in real time the difference between a reaction that comes from your past conditioning and a response that aligns with the version of you that is moving forward. Because most people are not living consciously. They are repeating patterns. The same emotional triggers, the same thought loops, the same behaviors playing out in different situations, giving the illusion of change while maintaining the same results. And this repetition is not accidental. It is the mind trying to preserve identity. Familiar patterns feel safe, even when they are limiting. So when you begin to shift, when you start choosing different responses, there is often resistance. Not from the outside, but from within. You may feel doubt, hesitation, even a subtle pull back toward what is known. And this is where awareness becomes power. Because the moment you can observe that pull without automatically following it, you create space. And in that space, you can choose differently. This is the beginning of mastery. Not controlling everything, but not being controlled unconsciously by what no longer serves you. Now, from a practical standpoint, this means slowing down your automatic responses. When something happens, instead of reacting instantly, you pause. You ask yourself, what version of me is about to respond right now? Is it the version built from past limitations, or the version aligned with where I'm going? This question alone begins to rewire your patterns, because it interrupts the loop. And over time, those interruptions become new defaults. This is how identity shifts in a real, grounded way. Not through extreme effort, but through repeated awareness applied at the right moments. And as this begins to stabilize, something interesting happens. You start noticing signals more clearly, not in a mystical sense, but in a practical one. Opportunities that match your direction become more visible. Conversations that matter stand out. Ideas that align with your growth come more frequently. And this is not because the world suddenly changed. It's because your filter did. You are now tuned to a different level of relevance. And that tuning is what people often describe as alignment. Now let's take this deeper into manifestation in a way that is both grounded and effective. Manifestation is often misunderstood as simply thinking about what you want and expecting it to appear. But in reality, it is a process of becoming compatible with a different outcome. That compatibility is built through 3 layers working together: clarity, emotional consistency, and aligned action. Clarity means you know what direction you are moving in, not necessarily every detail, but the general outcome. Emotional consistency means you are not constantly contradicting that direction with doubt, fear, or instability. And aligned action means your behavior supports that direction instead of working against it. When these 3 are in sync, your probability of reaching that outcome increases significantly. Not because of magic, but because your decisions, focus, and effort are all moving in the same direction. This reduces internal conflict, and when internal conflict is reduced, progress becomes more efficient. Now here is something that is rarely emphasized. You do not need to feel perfect to move forward. You do not need complete confidence before taking action. What you need is enough awareness to recognize when you are moving in the right direction, and enough discipline to continue even when it feels uncertain. Because uncertainty is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you are stepping beyond what is familiar. And growth always exists outside of familiarity. This is where most people stop. They interpret discomfort as a warning instead of recognizing it as part of expansion. But if you stay with it, if you continue to act in alignment despite that discomfort, it begins to fade, and what replaces it is a sense of stability at a higher level. This is what it means to raise your baseline. The things that once felt difficult become normal. The actions that once required effort become natural. And the identity you were trying to build becomes the identity you live from. At this stage, manifestation no longer feels like something you are trying to do. It feels like something that is happening as a result of who you are being. And this is where the concept of timeline mastery becomes real, because now you are not just reacting to what happens. You are influencing direction through consistent alignment. Every decision becomes more intentional. Every action carries more clarity. And over time, this creates momentum. And momentum is one of the most powerful forces in any system, because once it builds, it carries you forward with less resistance. Now, as this process continues, there comes a point where something shifts internally in a way that is difficult to reverse. You begin to see your patterns clearly. You recognize your role in your own outcomes, and you understand that while you cannot control everything, you can influence far more than you previously believed. This awareness changes your relationship with reality. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting for things to happen, and you start seeing yourself as someone participating in the direction of your life. And once that shift happens, you reach what can be described as a point of no return. Not because you are forced to move forward, but because going back to unconscious patterns no longer feels the same. You can still choose them, but now you are aware of the choice. And that awareness removes the illusion that you are stuck. It places responsibility back in your hands, not as pressure, but as control. And from that point forward, your growth becomes a matter of consistency rather than discovery. You already understand the principles. You already recognize your patterns. The only question that remains is whether you apply what you know on a daily basis. Because small actions repeated over time will always outperform occasional bursts of effort. And this is where everything comes together. The idea of being chosen, the understanding of awareness, the concept of timelines, and the practice of alignment all lead to the same place. A more intentional way of living. One where you are not driven entirely by external circumstances, but guided by internal clarity. And that clarity allows you to move through uncertainty with more confidence, to make decisions with more precision, and to recognize opportunities that align with your direction. As this message comes to an end, it is important to understand that nothing you heard here is meant to stay as information. It is meant to be applied in small, consistent ways. Pay attention to your thoughts, not to control them completely, but to understand their patterns. Notice your emotional responses, not to suppress them, but to prevent them from unconsciously directing your actions. And most importantly, take action in alignment with where you want to go, even if it is small. Because direction matters more than intensity. Over time, those small aligned actions will compound into significant change. And that change will not feel sudden. It will feel like a natural progression, like something that was building all along. This is how real transformation happens, quietly, consistently, and in a way that becomes part of who you are. So as you leave this moment, do not look for a dramatic sign to confirm that something has shifted. Look for the subtle differences in how you think, how you respond, and how you choose to act, because those differences are the beginning of a new direction, and the more you reinforce them, the stronger that direction becomes. You were not here by accident. Your attention was drawn here because something in your current state resonated with this level of understanding. And now that you have it, what you do with it is entirely up to you. Not in a way that demands perfection, but in a way that invites consistency. Because consistency over time is what turns awareness into mastery. And mastery is not about controlling every outcome. It is about navigating your path with clarity, adapting when necessary, and continuing to move forward with intention. That is the real meaning behind what you just experienced. Not that something external chose you, but that you reached a point where you could recognize something deeper. And once you recognize it, you have the opportunity to integrate it. And once you integrate it, it becomes part of how you operate. And from that point forward, your life is no longer shaped only by what happens to you, but by how you understand it, how you respond to it, and how consistently you align with the direction you have chosen.